Altitude? I can't see the ground. The altimeter says 1,000 feet, but it is December 30th, 1946. A massive U.S. Navy seaplane, call sign George 1, is fighting for its life against an invisible enemy. Outside the cockpit, the world has ceased to exist. There is no sky. There is no ocean. There is only a suffocating, blinding whiteness. The temperature outside is 40 degrees below zero. The location is the most hostile, unexplored corner of Antarctica. The crew believes they are flying over open water. They trust their instruments. They trust their machine. They are wrong. They are flying directly into the rise of a phantom coastline that shouldn't be there. In a split second, a secret mission turns into the most remote plane crash in human history. 9 men, 1 frozen continent. No one knows exactly where they are, and due to the classified nature of their mission, no one is coming to save them anytime soon. This isn't just a story about a crash. It is a forensic analysis of a disaster. It is a story about 13 days of absolute hell, about hallucinations, the biological reality of freezing to death, and the impossible choices 6 men had to make to survive on the Phantom Coast.
To understand why these men were flying into a blizzard at the bottom of the world, we have to peel back the layers of history to 1946. World War II had just ended. The wreckage of Europe was still smoking. But the United States military wasn't celebrating. They were terrified. They were preparing for the next war, a war they believed would be fought not in the trenches of France, but across the polar ice caps against the Soviet Union. Antarctica was the final strategic prize, a massive, unclaimed continent larger than the United States and Europe combined. In 1946, it was a blank spot on the map. Rumors were swirling in Washington, whispers of secret bases, vast mineral deposits, and the potential for a frozen fortress that could dominate the southern hemisphere. In response, the U.S. Navy launched Operation Highjump. It remains, to this day, the largest Antarctic expedition ever attempted. This was not a small scientific team. This was an invasion force, 4,700 men, 13 warships, including an aircraft carrier, 33 aircraft. The public mission was scientific exploration, but the classified orders were clear: establish sovereignty, map the coastline, and deny the territory to any potential enemy. At the tip of this spear was the crew of George 1, a PBM Mariner seaplane. These were huge, lumbering beasts designed for long-range patrol. On board were 9 young men, pilots, radio men, mechanics, regular guys drafted into a geopolitical chess game they barely understood. Their specific target was the Thurston Island area. Cartographers called it the Phantom Coast. Why? Because every map drawn of this area up to that point was wrong. Where the maps showed open ocean, there was solid ice. Where they showed flat ice shelves, there were jagged mountains. The map wasn't just inaccurate, it was a death trap waiting to spring.
The flight began normally enough, but as George 1 pushed further south, the notorious Antarctic weather began to show its teeth. A phenomenon known as a whiteout engulfed the plane. For those of you watching in Canada, you understand the terror of this optical illusion. It isn't just fog. The sunlight diffuses through the clouds and reflects off the snow, erasing all shadows.
Without shadows, the human eye loses all depth perception. The horizon disappears. Up becomes down. The sky and the ground merge into a single, blinding sheet of white. Here is where the technology failed them. The crew was relying on a radar altimeter. This device fires radio waves down to the ground and measures the time it takes for them to bounce back. But they were flying over the ice shelf. The ice here was centuries old, pure and free of air bubbles. To the radar waves, this pure ice was invisible. The signals didn't bounce off the surface, they penetrated deep into the ice, bouncing off the bedrock hundreds of feet below. The instruments told the pilot, Frenchie, that he had 1,000 feet of clearance. He felt safe. But in physical reality, the belly of the plane was skimming just feet above the rising terrain. They were flying blind, at 150 miles per hour, directly into a geographical incline. Frenchie felt a sudden, sickening bump, a vertigo sensation. Instinct took over. He pulled back on the stick. "Pull up!" he screamed. But inertia is a cruel law of physics. A 30-ton aircraft cannot change direction instantly. The PBM Mariner didn't just crash, it was effectively disassembled by the impact. The plane slammed into a ridgeline. The fuel tanks, carrying thousands of liters of high-octane aviation gasoline, ruptured instantly. The explosion was catastrophic. It tore the fuselage in half. The rear section was sheared off. The cockpit was crushed. Bodies were thrown into the snow like rag dolls. The silence that followed the explosion must have been the loudest sound these men had ever heard. Ensign Lopez and Henderson, the physics of the crash, gave them no chance. They were gone instantly. For the survivors, the immediate threat wasn't the cold, it was the shock.
The survivors dragged themselves from the burning wreckage. They were battered, bleeding, and entering the early stages of hypothermia. Frenchie, the pilot, had been thrown through the windshield. He was burned so badly his face was unrecognizable. His eyes were swollen shut. He couldn't speak. His lips were fused together by the heat and the cold. Fred Williams was in even worse shape. His back was broken. Every movement sent shock waves of agony through his nervous system. The situation was chemically precise. The human body begins to shut down at a core temperature of 35 degrees Celsius. At minus 30 degrees Celsius, exposed skin freezes in under 5 minutes. If they stayed in the open, they would all be dead within the hour. Their only hope lay in the tail section of the plane, the tunnel. It was a metal tube ripped from the rest of the aircraft. It was dark. It smelled of spilled gasoline and burnt rubber, but it was shelter. They crawled inside, dragging their wounded comrades. They found a parachute and stuffed it into the gaping hole to block the wind. Now began the psychological horror. Imagine the situation. You are thousands of miles from the nearest civilization. You have no radio. No one knows you crashed here. And outside, a blizzard is burying your only shelter under feet of snow. Days blurred into nights. In the Antarctic summer, the sun barely sets, creating a confusing twilight that messes with the circadian rhythm. Sleep became dangerous. To fall asleep in these temperatures meant you might never wake up. But strangely, the cold, the very thing trying to kill them, was also keeping them alive. Frenchie's burns were severe. In a hospital or in a jungle, he would have died of infection within days. Bacteria would have swarmed the open wounds. But the Antarctic air is sterile. It is too cold for bacteria to replicate. The deep freeze acted as a suspended animation for his injuries, preventing gangrene from setting in. Robbins, a mechanic, emerged as the leader of their survival. He scavenged a small gas stove from the wreckage. He siphoned dangerous aviation fuel to power it. It was a ticking bomb, lighting a gas stove inside a fume-filled metal tube, but it gave them heat. Their diet was a study in malnutrition. Spinach soup and peanut butter, that was it. They melted snow for water, careful not to eat the snow directly, as the energy required to melt it in the stomach would lower their body temperature fatally. But the real enemy wasn't the cold. It was the mind. As the days stretched to a week, the adrenaline wore off, replaced by a crushing despair. They started writing letters to their families, final testaments they assumed would be found on their frozen bodies years later. Robbins found a camera in the snow. It belonged to Lopez, one of the men who died. He snapped photos of the crash site. Why? It was a human need to leave a mark, to prove, against the silence of the continent, that they had existed.
500 kilometers away, on the seaplane tender USS Pine Island, the mood was grim. The command center knew George I was down, but they were facing a mathematical nightmare. Antarctica is vast. Finding a white plane buried in white snow in a white desert is harder than finding a needle in a haystack. It's like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. The search and rescue teams were grounded for 2 weeks. The weather was simply too dangerous to fly. To launch a rescue plane into the same storm that killed George I would be suicide. The captain of the Pine Island had to make the heart-wrenching decision to wait, knowing that every hour they waited, the chances of finding anyone alive dropped to 0. On day 13, the meteorological window finally opened. The clouds broke. The sun hit the ice pack. Inside the tunnel, Frenchie, blinded by his burns, whispered that he heard a plane. The others ignored him. Cockpit ear, they called it. Auditory hallucinations common in pilots under stress. But then the sound grew louder. A drone. A rumble. The survivors scrambled out of their metal coffin. They didn't have flares. They had rubber rafts and debris, and they doused them in gasoline. They lit the fire. A column of thick black smoke rose into the pristine blue sky, an unnatural signal that could be seen for miles. A PBM Mariner, a sister ship to the one they crashed, dipped its wings. They had been found. The relief was overwhelming, reducing grown men to tears. But the celebration was short-lived. The rescue plane circled, but it didn't land. It couldn't. The terrain below was a jagged field of sastrugi, wind-hardened ridges of snow that are as hard as concrete. If the rescue plane tried to land there, it would rip its hull open, creating a second disaster. They dropped a note, a handwritten message that crushed the survivors' hearts. Walk 10 miles north to the open lake. Join hands and form a circle if you can walk. Form a line if you cannot. Walk? Frenchie couldn't see. Williams had a broken back. They were starving, dehydrated, and their muscles had atrophied from 2 weeks of immobility. But the alternative was death.
What followed was one of the most grueling feats of endurance in survival history. They didn't just walk. They had to construct makeshift sleds from the wreckage to drag their crippled friends. They strapped Frenchie and Williams to sheets of aluminum. The snow wasn't packed hard, it was soft powder,
Every step required lifting the leg high and stomping down. For men who had been living on peanut butter and melted snow, the caloric burn was unsustainable. They pulled the sleds through chest-high snow. The wind whipped at their exposed faces. It took them 12 hours to move those 10 miles. That is less than 1 mile per hour. It was a slow-motion agony. The rescue plane circled overhead, acting as a guide, dropping markers. But even with help, the physical toll was immense. And then, nature had one last cruel twist. They finally reached the coordinates of the lake. They could see the flat ice where the plane could land, but standing between them and salvation was a cliff, a 20-meter drop of sheer ice. Fog began to roll in. If the fog covered the lake, the rescue plane would have to leave. They would be trapped on the edge of the cliff, exposed to the elements, just yards from safety.
Miraculously, they found a small ramp of snow, a natural bridge down the cliff face. They slid down, stumbling onto the frozen lake just as the fog began to thicken. Two figures emerged from the mist. The rescue team. After 13 days, the ordeal of George 1 was over. They were hauled aboard the rescue plane. Warmth, coffee, blankets, things that felt like alien luxuries. They were heroes, but the mission remained classified for a long time. As the Cold War heated up, the story of George 1 was buried in Navy archives. The US government didn't want to advertise a failed mission, nor did they want to reveal the precise areas they were mapping. But three men never left Antarctica: Henderson, Lopez, and Williams. Wait, didn't I say Williams survived? Fred Williams, the man with the broken back, survived the crash. He survived the explosion. He survived the 13 days in a freezing tunnel. He survived the 10-mile death march dragging his broken body across the ice. He made it back to the ship, but the trauma was too great. The internal injuries, combined with the stress of the ordeal, were too much for his body to recover from. Tragically, shortly after returning to civilization, the crash claimed its final victim. Today, the wreckage of George 1 is still there, but you won't see it on Google Earth. Over 80 years of snowstorms have buried it. Glaciologists estimate it is now hundreds of feet deep, encased in the ice sheet. The bodies of the fallen crew are still at their posts, perfectly preserved by the cold, eternal sentinels on the Phantom Coast. The camera Robbins found, it was left behind in the chaos of the rescue. The photos of the crash site are still there, frozen in time, waiting for a future explorer to develop them. The story reminds us of a humble truth. We may map the world, we may claim territories with flags and armies, but we do not conquer nature. Antarctica does not care about borders or missions. It is a place where human technology is fragile, and the only thing that keeps us alive is the sheer, stubborn will to survive. If you want to uncover more lost history and survival analysis like this, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us dig deeper into the archives. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.